This is the Nomad Futurist Podcast, a podcast about the evolution of technology, society, and transformation. Connect with us, share your thoughts with us at nomadfuturist.com. Let's get this started. Here are Phil and Nabil. Hello. Welcome to Nomad Futurist. This is Nabil Mahmood from Hawaii.
Philip Koblenz from Brooklyn, New York.
And David Bartholomai here from beautiful Lincoln, Nebraska.
David, thank you for joining us, Nomad Futurist. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm the Chief Operating Officer with Archer Data Centers. We're building a data center in Nashville, Tennessee, outside of the metro. And Gallatin is the actual city where we're building. Got to this place in a roundabout way. I've been in the data business, I guess we can say, back when the way we shared data were through books. I worked for the Bell South Advertising and Publishing, and we had probably the best data collection of individuals and businesses and whatnot. And we put out a book once a year, the yellow pages, the white pages, and the way I kind of progressed into this data center role was through that. Always been an early adopter with technology. My first computer was a video console, a little Atari unit. And so being in business, I found a lot of applications. My degree was in accounting, focused on getting into business. At the end of college, I started to look into coding, and they were teaching things like COBOL and Fortran, and that just didn't seem where I wanted to go. So to shorten the story a little bit here, the yellow pages, you could tell it was declining. The internet was coming into play. A friend of mine and I, a coworker, we went to the headquarters of our region of Bell South back at the time, which was in Dayton, Ohio, and spoke to the president of our operating company and a lot of executives there. And we saw this, the idea that our business was going to be supplanted, the way of sharing this information. And little by little, we could see this thing coming, but it was kind of a slow death of that industry. Their answers at the time were that they wanted to be fast followers on the internet. So that didn't really work out so well. That left a good void for the companies that did ultimately run the internet and are still in place today, the big hyperscale type guys that we work with in our data center industry. That opened the door for their sharing of information. So through that, always had an interest in that. As the yellow pages started to fade away, got into the data center business, wanted to stay in publishing because there was a connection there. So went to work for a company called Sandhills Publishing, where we had a magazine called Processor Magazine, and it sold all the bits and pieces that went into data centers, all the different mechanical units, the things that facilities type things more than anything. So that's where I gained some information on data centers, went into asset recycling, after several years there and staying in the data center line. And in that case, we worked with Lincoln, Nebraska here, worked with some of the big Fortune 500 companies that were in Nebraska on their asset disposal and kind of end-of-life asset management, and ultimately went to the state of Nebraska, where the state was making a focus of recruiting data centers to locate in Nebraska through tax incentives and just the natural site attributes that would come into play there. And we were quite successful with that. Brought a couple enterprise data centers in, large enterprise data centers, followed by several of the hyperscalers. So we're now, Omaha's become, the Omaha metro, it's become quite a hub, for the large campus type data centers. After leaving the state after about 7-8 years, went into a consulting business where I met my partner, now Jordan Millman, early clients, and we decided to go out and build our own company based on the premise of putting data centers in markets like Omaha that are secondary markets, not in this, what they call the NFL cities of the internet. After doing a nationwide search, we settled on Nashville, and now we're under construction.
So did you ever actually pursue COBOL further, or was that just more of a high-level intro and you did not pursue it any further?
No, I know it's still in place. I mean, I know there's a friend of mine in my golf league, maybe just retired from the state of Nebraska, but they use Cobalt to this day. I think so. My interest in it has been the fact that it's still, I didn't want to get into the nuts and bolts of actually being a coder. But I do realize that with some of these languages, they've been part of the slowed approach of companies adopting current technologies and current languages and coding languages, because they have so much invested in proprietary software that they have to continue to fix things in languages like COBOL.
Well, there was actually a story recently where, like, the New Jersey Unemployment Office had a request for COBOL programmers to come and try to fix their antiquated unemployment system because it was completely overloaded with increased submissions with what's going on right now. So, yeah, COBOL is still very much alive.
Yes, and they're not alone. I just read an article this morning where Nebraska signed a big contract with Nelnet, who is a student loan processor, as their primary business, and they needed to outsource the unemployment applications, and that was the role. They subcontracted out to Nelnet, where that wasn't anything remotely like their business, but it's something they had the technology in place to scale up where the state could not.
Yeah, part of the challenge is COBOL is an antiquated language, like Phil just said as well. New Jersey was a great example. Then you had the Department of Unemployment is a great example that they have a platform that's about 20, 30 years old. Not necessarily we're trying to age ourselves over here, but that actually raises some challenges. And those challenges we see today, whereby we don't have those resources anymore. We don't have the people that had that skill set, or the language or the platform is actually kind of dissipated in some way, form, or shape, creating more challenges. So from a technologist perspective, they got to be able to keep up with time and change. Otherwise, issues like this are going to come up on an ongoing basis. Now, the capacity that you're in as a chief operating officer and partner in a data center company, what are your thoughts about the curve of migration?
Well, I think this current situation we find ourselves in is demonstrating the need to scale your IT infrastructure very quickly, but not permanently. I mean, these things, like we just discussed with the spike in unemployment applications, they're not going to be a item that's in demand for these entities. Hopefully we're not seeing the kind of unemployment applications we're seeing now. But these are examples where the cloud is very important. I mean, the type of migration I see overall is a progression from where we are now, which I still hear the number kicked out that about 60% of data centers are still on premises within companies. I do see that declining because companies are shifting loads to the public cloud, to the major cloud providers. However, there are certain things, as we've discussed, that companies are going to, for a while, want to keep more control of that data in their own operations. It could be some of these proprietary programs, could be things run on mainframes, things that don't just lend themselves well to the cloud. So I think this hybrid approach is what we're seeing. So I think our business as a data center operator will continue to see we'll see tenants that'll be companies that are currently doing things on premises. They're not scaled properly. They either have a spike in demand for their business where they need to scale up a little bit. In most cases, they're scaled too far. They built with the idea they needed to grow, and they're finding themselves using a fourth to a half of their capacity at most, and the rest of their capacity is just stranded. So that's the progression I see. What percentage that becomes for enterprises still doing, say, wholesale co-location, which is our core business, versus ones that want to use managed services or even public cloud type things and have those work well together. Who knows? That's the future. But a data center is going to be needed to serve either of those. And data centers, I believe, are going to need to be set to serve each market. The edge is what we're talking about here. Each market will need to have a certain scale of compute power and internet connectivity based on its own size. as opposed to the current model where everything is located in 5 or 6 cities, because that's the only locations where companies can get the right kind of economics. I mean, right now, when you go into some of these underserved markets like a Nashville, Omaha, just to name a couple that I'm very familiar with, we're still paying retail pricing for co-location space. And when companies like, say, ConAgra here in Omaha, when they decided they really didn't need their 2 megawatt data center in Omaha, they moved their 300 kW load into a wholesale cloud solution in Chicago, because that solution did not exist in Omaha. Others, I think Mutual Omaha, not sure where they stand right now in their final decision, but I believe they very much wanted to stay local. And I believe they were able to negotiate terms with one of the providers that would be a wholesale type lease, have the wholesale economics. And that was good for them, because companies do like to keep the team together. They have most of their employees, and there are also just some, I don't know if you'd want to call it latency or improvement or what have you, but just having your compute close to where your customers or your employees are is still an important thing.
Right, because the last mile that really matters.
Right.
David and I met when he was in Nebraska, trying to bring larger enterprise into Nebraska, such as Facebook, Google, and a few others for that matter. So that's where we actually ended up becoming friends. David, you mentioned a couple of very interesting things, right? The slow death of Yellow Pages. We briefly talked about the COBOL language, which is, again, a slow death of that language and that platform. You also talked about migration from on-prem. Again, that really means in layman terms, people having their own data centers and computing platforms at home versus a migration to cloud, whether it be public or private cloud. And then you talk about edge. Are you of the belief that on-prem solutions or on-prem computing is probably going to dissipate in the near future? Is that going to be the slow death of people managing their own data in their own premises?
I think in their own premises, certainly. I think they will want to have it close by. But one of the things that I'm studying, trying to understand better, is this relationship between DevOps and facilities. You and I we were going to speak on a panel to that at one time about how these groups communicate. And so I think that doesn't have to be in the same building for that good communications to take place, but being in the same city is useful, as opposed to being so remote. The performance will be better in those cases. So I think companies that really want to maintain control of what they're doing, they won't necessarily build in their facility. There's a hospital, for example, that has a huge data center in the basement of the hospital premises. That's not ideal for a lot of things. It's very ideal for that hospital, for the things that are just, because this is a bulletproof data center. I mean, it's backed up in every way possible, and cogen on plant, that sort of thing. That just has everything it needs, but it's just not the right place or location to change technology. It's not the right place, for that. But the people and the talent they have in terms of the facilities and the relationships with their DevOps teams and that sort of thing, they want to continue that. They want to keep the talent that they have. So our whole business premise is on the idea that these guys will ultimately move into a facility such as ours.
I think in general, there's always been a conflation between the word on-premise data center and whether that's conflated with what a co-location or retail data center is, and which is it's conflated with what wholesale data centers are, which in some cases store or host large cloud deployments and whatnot. And I think it's an interesting distinction for those of our listeners that are around our world to make sure it's clear that those are not necessarily one versus the other. So when we say that there's potentially a decline in on-premise data center usage, that distinction of on-premise data center meaning critical infrastructure that's hosted within a particular corporate office infrastructure or a hospital versus the flexibility, the economies of scale, that sort of thing that you get from being in a retail or wholesale data center that's designed for multi-tenancy, that's designed to encapsulate the varying levels of power redundancy and security resilience and compliance and all those things. And to the extent that a particular application or a particular workload makes more sense within controlled environment where you can, go point to physically where that data is hosted, either because it is, uber secure or is on, a more traditional set of resources that are more difficult to deploy within the cloud, is an interesting kind of nuanced look at the death of the on-premise data center as a common theme across all these panels that I'm sure you guys have been on, versus the idea that David mentioned with hybrid, where you would deploy within the data center and then maybe effectively interconnect to a cloud provider and create an approach where the workloads that lend themselves towards that environment are able to live in their little worlds.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, right? But the challenge that I foresee is the death of the data center on-prem is not going to happen. I was looking at some numbers last night. $234 billion globally is spent in the data center marketplace, with a compound annual growth rate projected right now in the current State of the Union at 16.7%. These are immaculate numbers. And the reason for that is because more applications are coming into play, whereby more data is needed. You've got IoT and other connected platforms that are requiring the access of data. So there's going to be a significant move into the cloud, the colo, the wholesale retail business, but there's going to be applications that are going to have to be kept on-prem. And that's going to address the last mile. That's going to potentially end up being those edge deployments as well. And also, I believe that as we move forward in time, and again, it's human nature, every decade we go centralized computing and decentralized computing, we come up with cloud or not to cloud, we come up with edge and micro edge or whatever the case might be, right? I mean, we are great in marketing and terminologies, but I believe the on-prem is going to stay to a certain degree, whereby it's going to potentially host mission critical applications purely based on what that business needs and requirements are. It's not ever going to be 100% cloud. It's never going to be 100% colo or wholesale or retail business focus as we move forward. In my opinion, some of the driving factors, and David, please add and expand onto it, it's all associated with finance at the end of the day. As much as computing is relevant and important, the driving factor in a lot of cases for a lot of executives is the financial impact, finance decision, and how quickly can they see ROI on it?
Yeah, I agree. And just to clarify, I guess there's, I'm talking two different types of, by on-premises, I'm talking places where companies have built their own discrete data centers in a separate building. I'm not talking about what's in a hospital or a bank at their headquarters, where there will always be need for a data center, in those cases, in their buildings. There'll always be that need, I believe, because that's going to become the central connection point of what's going on there to their connectivity to the rest of the world. So there will be, and some of that data will be, need to be processed there locally. What I'm talking about more, what I see the death of is the discrete, separate data center where a company that's in, we'll stay with these two industries we're discussing, the hospitals and banking, healthcare and banking. If they have the desire to build more capacity and they don't have room clearly, in their core facility, if it's say where they also have their office building, or they're not going to go out and build a 1 megawatt data center, 2 megawatt data center, heaven forbid an 8 megawatt data center. We had these enterprise companies in Omaha building what they were planning initially to be 8 megawatt deals. The two I have in mind perhaps are serving less than a megawatt right now. So they have a lot of stranded capacity there, plus stranded expense because they built out for this type of load. Company owned, maybe a better way to describe it than on premises. A case where a company is going to make the capital investment in generators and all the things that go into a, have. So that's two different things maybe, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about yourself. It's a great story, how you started, where you ended up, what you're doing now. The yellow pages are gone.
I can only imagine some of our listeners don't even know what the yellow pages are.
I believe it.
All right.
I believe it. Yeah. Right.
And for those of you that don't know, that's literally where you would go to look up someone's address or someone's phone number, or maybe where, what kind of company you would use for plumbing or whatever you needed. That was it. You had this big yellow thing and a big white thing. There was a white pages and a yellow pages. The yellow pages was the commercial version. And that's how I learned to drive a car was, my father let me sit on top of a yellow pages so I could reach the steering wheel.
Now you can do that virtually, Phil.
No, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, these books were here. They were just for a city the size of Lincoln. I mean, our Yellow Pages was a 4-inch thick book that came out once a year, and little by little, it's funny, they still deliver them. Now they're little pamphlets that are bound. It's sad in some ways, but they've converted to other. But obviously, Maubell was was Humpty Dumpty being put back together again, because AT&T is clearly a prominent player now in the in our current world.
Yeah, so there certainly has been a transition, right? The Yellow Pages to online information access, information at your fingertips. Sears being the largest catalog business to now Amazon. So it's significantly transitioned, though the core premise of it is the same in a lot of ways. What skill set were you able to develop to get in the data center space that you would recommend the younger generation that's potentially listening to this podcast, or people that are in different industries that could be a good asset to be a part of the data center industry? What skill sets have you developed, and what would you recommend some of those books? Critical
thinking maybe is the number one item there. And I'm a businessman first and foremost. I'm not a technologist. Really, I'm going to rely on people like you to make things happen that I need to happen. But I really have almost an imagination where I don't see limits as to what can be done. And I know that may frustrate some folks that are on the other side of me, asking them to do the impossible. But it's just thinking through whatever your current solution is for your business. You always want to think of your technology. It has to support your business. It has to have a business need for it. I mean, the business of the internet right now is advertising. It's really what it is. It is the Yellow Pages in some ways, if you think about it. What's fueling our networks is the growth of a few companies and how they have built out networks to share this information, and they built it on the back of advertising. Their dollars come in from advertising. So just thinking through your business solutions and how that works. With that, you're giving up a lot of privacy. We talked about that. So I just basic critical thinking and problem solving. You have a problem. I see a problem that this idea where you can still control the equipment that goes into your data center. You can still be a company. You can have complete control of that. But in order to do that, you have to uproot the data center to another city. If you're in a secondary market, if you're in anything but the big 5 or 6 cities that have a wholesale presence, or the economics remain where you might still build the data center yourself, just because you're going to have to pay so much to lease it that you may as well own the assets, just depending on the capital structure of your company. But I think the biggest thing is just being open-minded to new ideas, and thinking through whether the way you're solving a problem today is the smartest way to do it. And one of the things I guess Mark Zuckerberg said he was looking for with people is they would bring folks in. He wanted them to break things and then rebuild them. So just because something is working, it's getting the job done, it's not necessarily working in the most efficient way. And we need to be efficient. I mean, we need to be. We use a lot of resources in this to collect. And, I ask Alexa what time it is. I don't know what kind of resources I use when I do that, but I think they're probably a lot more than if I just looked at my watch. So we have to be very efficient.
We've got to put humanity first. David, I don't want to do a study on you asking Alexa what time it is and how much of a carbon emission footprint increase that potentially is.
Well, you should probably just look at the sun and know where that is. That's how they used to do it.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I think is important, Ed, what you say, I mean, you've had a unique pathway to where you live because you've been able to kind of transition from a more traditional business into the data center world. And I think one of the things that tends to, maybe frustrate is the wrong word, but kind of freeze people when they're thinking of a transition to the data center world is that it's too technical. And at the end of the day, the same thing that's running, like whatever is happening on the back end of Alexa, whatever's running the public cloud, whatever's in a data center is still based on the same underlying infrastructure that has been around since the Industrial Revolution. You know, it's copper touching copper, it's glass touching glass, it's large air-conditioned rooms, and yes, you can get into technical details about large-scale, you know, software-defined networking and AI and all those things, but essentially that's just obfuscation layers away from a cup and a string connecting two different things and establishing communications past it. And if you get past that underlying kind of fear that there's something uber technical about what goes on in a data center and that it is not necessarily relevant to someone that isn't like a computer geek or a programmer or whatever, then you start to recognize that just that problem solving gene, when people ask me what I do, you know, after trying to explain to them, you know, I'm a landlord, but my tenants are computers. After trying to go through all those different weird things, I just say I solve problems all day, which makes me sound like a hitman. But it's like the geekiest way to solve problems in the world. But that's it. You know, you have a hot spot and you have heat. You have to introduce cold air, and now you have heat that's dissipating, and then you put a box around it and you contain it, and all those things. A lot of the underlying things that run the most technically complex applications on the world are incredibly low tech when you think about it. And the same problems people are solving in their daily lives are the same problems that people like yourselves are solving, you know, in a larger way in the data center world.
Yeah, makes sense.
So COVID is transforming your lives. How has that impacted you and your business?
Well, it hasn't impacted me tremendously because I live in Nebraska. My partner lives in New York. We're building our data center in Nashville. We work from home, you know, so this is not a new thing to me. It's in terms of my life. I do like to get outside a bit, and here in Nebraska, we're able to do that. Really, it's not, and I think you certainly can in Hawaii, you know, as well. One of the things I've spent a lot of time. I've probably spent a lot more time thinking of statistics and looking at the graphs of the different cases and so on in different places, just to see how this is rolling out. So that's become more of an interest. It already was a big interest, but so I'm probably spending a lot of time looking at that. I don't like to listen to other people describe to me what's going on with the data. I'd rather just look at the raw data and draw my own conclusions. And so I'm looking at that. Business-wise, we're on track to build our data center. We just finished all the site preparation, and we were slowed down because of rain in Nashville. You can't move dirt. You can't do the things that you need to when it's raining heavily every 3 days.
So no restrictions as it entails from the government perspective that you can't have more than 10 people on a job site.
The state of Tennessee has deemed construction as an essential service. So we can have more than 10 people on a job site. They need to maintain social distancing. And I'm not just talking about Archer data centers here. I'm talking about all of us. We can all speculate what's going to happen as companies reopen. We can speculate on how many customers are even going to want to go out when they can go out to places where there's more than 10 people in a close area. You will just have to see. So what happens if someone on our construction site contracts the disease? That would shut us down. We know that would shut us down. That would slow us down for an amount of time.
Social distancing, I believe, is going to be the norm of the future. We've got to change the way we do things in business. And it's a great opportunity to leverage technology. It's a great opportunity to think differently starting now. And I also believe that COVID-19, it's not a matter of if we're going to get it. We're all going to get it. It's a matter of when.
That's what my wife says, and she's a nurse, so she agrees with you there.
Oh, good. What do you think is the new norm in your line of work, in your business as post COVID-19?
Well, I do think that there will be more things. There'll at least have to have the ability to scale up if we need to. We will go back into the fall. If this follows the track of any other coronaviruses in the past, there will be another outbreak. It'll have to happen. That's the case. We will not have a vaccine in place by that time. We may have treatments, so we'll see. But there will be the need for companies to do more things on a virtual basis, like things like what we're doing right now, having this podcast or doing it on a Zoom video, and it's Zoom was ready for this. I mean, they had some issues apparently, so I have to take my hat off to those guys and to the networks that were built around to make them work with them. So I think the sheer need to do more things virtually will be overall a positive thing for the data center industry and for cloud computing and for companies that need to connect to that cloud and continue to manage their day-to-day affairs without being restricted to an office. I think some of the companies that have kind of been forced to work from home in this case are seeing, hey, this is not a bad deal. Why am I paying for all this office space? I mean, I'm hearing that from a couple companies here did extremely well with their employees working at home, or Nelnet and Mutual Omaha. And these were primarily large call centers. They were taking calls from all over, and with technology, they can do that just as effectively from their homes. So for states like Nebraska that are have smaller populations, that this could be a good thing for people that want to continue to stay in Nebraska. Kids coming out of school or what have you, they want to work for companies that say they have their headquarters or what have you is in Chicago or in Denver, which is typically where Nebraska loses folks. As we free our minds a little on working more in this way, we'll be using more data, but think of the resources we're cutting down in terms of commuting to work, a lot of the travel, the key thing here is uncertainty. We don't know. I've
tried to find swim routes for me to be able to get to Kona to visit Nabil, and I've tried to work on my my ability to hold my breath in the bathtub. It's not working out as quickly as well as I thought. While we're talking about COVID-19 and the data center, right now you're in an incredibly early stage, so it's difficult to really get an assessment of how it's impacting customers, because there are no customers to impact at this point. But as you get towards the later stages of construction, and you have to think about now you're getting the equipment in and the cooling towers and the UPSs and all of that stuff. Do you think that, and I guess uncertainty is key, so we don't really know, but do you think that there's going to be a supply chain issue in
Absolutely.
terms of delays on any of that equipment?
Absolutely. Yeah, no doubts about it, because there's a supply chain crunch right now. I mean, there are these factories where generators were ordered and where they were being made. A lot of those are in China, mm-hmm. and they're closed. And so generators aren't being made. So when things do start to free up, that's another leading indicator that I'm looking at, is I'm looking to see what's happening in places where the first wave of the virus has come and gone, and just to see how they do as they get back to work. But that's going to put a tremendous crunch on our supply chain, because all those orders that were already in there are in place. The kind of the dominance by the 5 or 6 companies. I don't have any stats on this, but I'm guessing 5 or 6 companies buy most of the generators in the world.
Right.
So they're going to get theirs first.
Sure.
So that's
and does that change how? I mean, has all that stuff been procured? Has that changed any procurement timelines in your end, where you're going to try to get orders in more quickly than maybe you would have otherwise wanted to move?
It may. I mean, we're taking a very conservative approach to our build. We're building a cold, dark shell right now. Is what we're building. We intentionally don't want to design a one solution fits all. There's plenty of that available out there now for folks that just want a certain solution. So we're trying to maintain as much flexibility within our design. And obviously, you can't start ordering equipment until you have your design tied down.
Of course,
our first customer will have a lot to do with how we fit out. Now, ideally, we get that customer before we need to spec out data center space. But that may not happen. That's a probability that we need to look at. So I think where we would go with this is perhaps not buying the size and scale of equipment. There's a certain size of generator, for example, that's the most popular that the large scale data centers would be using. We may look at something that's not as popular and perhaps not as economically attractive in the incremental phase is to, you may buy three smaller generators instead of two larger generators,
Sure.
or what have you, to hit your N+1. Yeah.
Right.
So you're not hitting the items that are hit so hard on the supply chain. So it may change our design. We've always felt these secondary markets are underserved. And so the idea of putting some inventory there, we want to get that going as fast as we can, and we can scale later at the better increments after things have calmed down a bit.
It's always a balance between trying to, do the field of dreams model of build it, they will come, and, having somebody walk around a site for deployment with a hard hat. So, and I totally get that. Last question on the data center deployment. So that's construction. So that's going to be defined in some respects by, what the specs are. Have you changed what you think the type of customer that's going to be attracted to the site will be based on, COVID-19 and where you've seen growth? I mean, you mentioned Zoom as a potential customer. Are you looking for a particular type of customer? Is it a public cloud provider? Is it potentially a large-scale enterprise? And has that changed at all?
Yeah, I think it's our target right now would be this on-premises. That ConAgra example is a perfect example. Company that had a larger demand, it scaled down. That 250 kW tenant is probably where our sweet spot would be, and that creates a nice valuable asset, improves the market, as opposed to, say, if you leased everything to one data center. I have concerns about some data centers that were built for, say, a hyperscaler. There's a 20 megawatt data center in Omaha, for example, that should that company move their data somewhere else, that if they decided they didn't need that 20 megawatt data center, then that asset becomes a warehouse like it was before it became a data center. So it has all this power to it, but there's no demand, in this market for that particular, size. So it's scary to put all your eggs in one basket for a single tenant like that for the long haul. Because, if you look at what many of the big guys are doing, they're building out these huge campuses, and eventually that'll be where all the heavy lifting is done, where the storage is done. It'll be on their own data centers and using their own infrastructure. They own the complete supply chain. In that case, they have their own fiber. They have relationships with multiple electrical suppliers in many cases, and they're starting to slow down now. I saw an article where one of them is starting to slow down a bit. This is slowing down construction. We just talked about what effect it's having on the supply chains. But the idea of making a big lease to a hyperscaler to fill the gap for a short time is not attractive in building a business.
Well, so it's for any business, right?
Scale. Exactly. Yeah, we go for any business. So I was always concerned, even when in our asset management business, when we look at our, we'd say 5 companies make up 80% of our business. It's a scary place to be. So I think, if anything, one thing that could change would be this: the people in the data center and working. You might see more lights out type thing, because that's the thing from talking to a lot of my friends, that they are seeing a restriction of just the number of people in the data center, in and out of the data center. And I think cutting down on the number of people in and out of the data center has a lot of positive effects. Security being right up there, with them. Just the sheer need of having, 2 different people. So we may see that we do migrate more towards services. It could be simple services initially. And I am seeing many of the customers I'm talking to, they are looking to go to, you have two different approaches, on this. Some want to keep control of a lot of things, and by control, have their people, in the data. Others are just wanting to wash their hands of the whole business and have all of their service managed by someone else, either in a public cloud or managed services. So again, I go back to that size for each market. I think there's a right size. It's a math problem that Nabil could solve for us, perhaps, on what that right optimization is for each market, what is needed. And I don't think it'll be exceeded. So I even think with the major markets right now, they have all of the supply. But what happens when the 5 or 6 companies that control the cloud, have 80% of data? What happens then? Then that could scale back to where those cities only serve what's needed for that city, and not to just pick up the slack until the hyperscalers have their own campuses built out.
So David, you mentioned work from home, work from anywhere. That's the future norm. There has been a major shift from retail to e-tail. Looking into the future, a lot of real estate is going to become available. Not a lot of people are going to go back in these commercial offices, or the real estate that was basically designed for retail is going to become available. What do you predict as far as the future is concerned? Will there be a continuous build of new environments, or will we see some TI, the tenant improvement, by leveraging some of the real estate that's going to come available in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think you get a little above my pay grade, on that in terms of predicting what's going to happen with this office space. That's not it's designed for office space. It could be, who knows? It's just a very uncertain thing. My crystal ball is not that clear on what that is going to look like. But I do believe there's going to be, I think the economics is what I'm afraid of with that. It's just the economy, the markets. And again, I'll probably get out of my depth a little on this, but I see the markets reacting very emotionally. What I'm concerned with are these underlying economic facts like this, like you're going to have a lot of real estate that's going to be underutilized. You're going to have an oversupply. I don't have a good prediction. What do you think? What's going to happen what do you think is going to go into some of that office space?
So I believe a digital transformation and a quick move, this is kind of like that hockey stick effect that I keep talking about. If it wasn't for COVID-19, we probably would have taken another 5 years to transition into a major cultural change. And the concept before was that a bum in the seat from an old guard's perspective was very productive, whereby now you can do the same thing remotely. So, work from home, work from anywhere is the new lifestyle. And you iterated that earlier. I believe there's going to be ample real estate that's going to come available, particularly with its commercial buildings. And simply looking from a mathematical perspective, I believe that land, that infrastructure is going to be sold, for pennies on the dollar. Mm-hmm. And a lot of real estate development firms are going to come in and improve that to build in data centers of some sort, whether it be edge sites, whether it be the last mile, whether it be just infrastructure to serve the regional markets. Probably is going to be a much better play in utilizing existing build-outs. And it's a significant cost savings as well. Why invest a significant amount of money in building something from scratch when something already exists? So I think that the real estate play is potentially going to change in the future. We need to leverage what's already existing. Let
me see if I can get both of your thoughts on this idea. I think that there's going to be a change in the way typical organizations view, what they are looking for from an office environment. So obviously there are a bunch of traditional companies that maybe were reticent to embrace work from home or remote work infrastructure, and the trend was moving in that direction anyway, particularly with technical types of companies and having to leverage talent wherever the talent is and not necessarily requiring them to move. And this certainly accelerated some of those existing trends. But in terms of, it's nice to have maybe a centralized place where people can congregate, maybe not on a daily basis or weekly basis or even monthly basis. But I think that there's a potential shift in the way commercial real estate is looked at by companies that are leveraging office environments, where it becomes more of kind of a communal, almost conference feeling to it, where people just come to that office for a monthly or quarterly meeting, or different teams are meeting at different places, and you're maintaining that office in such a way where gone are the cubicles and the offices, and it's just more kind of almost in New York. There's like convene space that is sometimes used for conferences that I'm sure we've all been to in the past. So I get the sense that you'll see people leveraging office environments for that. What do you think? You think that's a possibility?
I do. I mean, that makes sense. That's it's the idea of the convene space versus so I think we've seen this open office space kind of come and go and fail in some ways, and different companies that thought that was the greatest thing in the world are now finding that it's very distracting to especially knowledge workers, someone that needs to kind of focus on something, and to have people around you and have all that social interaction that takes place in some of the open type places. But what you're describing, is a different use. It's for people. It's for a lot of these freelancers. People that are out there that wouldn't normally rent a typical small office, in a big building, but they'd rather be in a case where they could come in when they want to, with groups of folks to collaborate, with. So I can see that, and I think this the drop in prices that you would see from that. I mean, if this happens, obviously we're looking at enables that in some ways, because some of the biggest drawbacks to you have an old piece of property, but it's still bringing in income. It still makes sense with the numbers as a piece of real estate. Our Carrier Hotel here in Nebraska, it's owned now by Nebraska Data Centers, and they had an old office building downtown Omaha. It serves as the telecom hotel. Maybe up to 50 or so different carriers come into that place now. Well, part of the drawback on being able to improve that building was that it was owned by this trust, a Hollywood family trust, and it was still generating income from small law firms and a few holdouts on several floors. Well, now they don't have that. They're able to build out the entire building as data center space, and it's a perfect example of how the edge plays out. Because, as I mentioned earlier, Omaha has become a hub for the major hyperscalers. Well, these guys still need to interconnect, and that's created great opportunity for that Carrier Hotel. This was a case where infrastructure was able to replace what was old, dated. I think the type of office spaces you're describing that I've seen all over New York, federal spaces, whatever. I mean, there's buildings that were designed with the way we worked, 40, 50 years ago, in some cases. And so these things could be monitored. Back to your point on the tenant improvements, Nabil, this will open the door as the value, goes down when the companies don't need them just for their big call center type things. And in the most expensive places in the world, think of what companies are paying. I mean, gosh, for what the companies here in Omaha are paying for leasing a small amount of space compared to what they would be paying in New York. Having to be able to lose that expense is going to have great economic benefit to many of those companies.
I've earned this hairline.
David, you touched on a lot of things. We talked about data centers. We talked about edge at a very high level. We talked about computing. We talked about the change in culture dynamics. We talked about working from anywhere, working from home being the new norm. As it entails to the future of tech, what excites you? What are some of the things that you're looking at today, both for personal and for professional interests?
I'm looking forward to how this is forcing people to use the tech that's out there now. I mean, it's great that there are a lot of new things that are on the horizon, but simple things like collaborating on spreadsheets or documents. I mean, it's hard to take people away from what they're accustomed to. And state organizations and many organizations I've been involved with, the technology has been there to collaborate, to do things like we're doing now. Really with this, and we could be sharing a screen. We could do anything. I just think this is going to now speed things up a bit, because we need to do things more virtually, and customers they'll lose that fear of it. Just like I spoke to you about the fear the executives had of just technology in general in the early days of my career. I mean, when you would talk to these guys about trying to change the way they did things for many, many years, the way throughout their whole career, they thrived in this. There was a lot of fear, in that. And this is helping people out of necessity lose some of that fear. So I'm excited to see people just use some of the technologies that we have.
Exciting times.
Yeah.
A lot of good things are going to come out of COVID-19. I think we need to retain and maintain a positive attitude on a go-forward basis. I think we need to think more as humans as we develop technology and introduce technology. We need to be more concerned about such as security, invasion of privacy, for instance, would be a few things, and potentially just leverage common sense.
That makes sense. One thing that comes to mind on that is we're obviously dropping a lot of regulation right now in healthcare. It all comes down to how technology is used. I'm comfortable in some cases, sharing personal information. In some cases, I'm very uncomfortable. That's we're kind of in a test lab.
This has been great. Nothing lasts forever. Markets will come back, currencies will rebound, businesses will go on. and we'll all move on. That could happen next week, next month, or next year. I'm confident that those who prepare rather than panic will come out of this stronger. Thank you for joining us. This has been brought to you by Nomad Futurist. Check us online at nomadfuturist.com.